I cared for my disabled wife for 16 years, until on Christmas Eve she told me, "I'm bored of you. I found a new love." I stayed silent until I discovered she was with my son-in-law. At the family Christmas party, I prepared a surprise. Subscribe to the channel for more stories like this and comment the city you're watching from. My name is Frank, and for 16 years, I believed I was living a love story. Every morning at 6:30, I would wake up to the sound of my alarm, roll out of bed quietly so I wouldn't disturb Judith, and begin what had become the most sacred routine of my life. I would prepare her medications, arrange them in the little plastic container with the days of the week printed on each compartment, and then gently wake my wife with a kiss on her forehead. "Good morning, beautiful," I would whisper, and she would smile, that soft smile that had kept me going through the hardest days. Judith had been in a wheelchair for 16 years. A car accident on Interstate 95 during a winter storm had changed everything. The doctors said she would never walk again, that the damage to her spinal cord was too severe. I remember sitting in that sterile hospital room, holding her hand while she cried, promising her that nothing would change between us, that I would take care of her forever. And I did. I gave up my job as a construction foreman to become her full-time caregiver. We lived off my disability benefits and her small insurance settlement, about $3,000 a month total. It wasn't much, but we made it work. I learned to cook, to clean, to help her with everything she needed. Physical therapy appointments twice a week, doctor visits, helping her in and out of the shower, transferring her to the bed, to the car, to anywhere she wanted to go. Our daughter Sarah was 22 when the accident happened. She had just married Benjamin, a guy she met in college. Nice enough fellow, worked in marketing for some tech company. They lived about 20 minutes away and visited every weekend without fail. Benjamin was always respectful, always asked if there was anything he could do to help. Sometimes he would move furniture for me or reach things on high shelves that I couldn't get to anymore. My back wasn't what it used to be at 59. The routine had become second nature. Wake up, medications, breakfast, help Judith get dressed and into her wheelchair, then whatever the day required. Sometimes it was grocery shopping, sometimes medical appointments, sometimes just sitting together watching television. She loved those cooking shows, always said she missed being able to stand at the stove and prepare meals the way she used to. I never complained, not once. When friends from my old job would call and suggest we meet up for beers, I would politely decline. When my brother invited me to go fishing, like we used to do every summer, I would tell him, maybe next year. Judith needed me. She was my wife, my responsibility, my entire world. The hardest part wasn't the physical demands of caregiving, it was watching the woman I loved struggle with depression, with feeling like a burden, with the frustration of not being able to do simple things for herself. There were nights when she would cry herself to sleep, and I would lie there next to her, feeling completely helpless. What do you say to someone whose independence has been stripped away? How do you convince them that they're still valuable, still loved, still worth everything you have to give? Christmas had always been special for us. Even after the accident, I made sure to keep up all our traditions. I would decorate the house, string lights around the wheelchair ramp I had built for the front porch, and cook her favorite holiday meals. This year was supposed to be no different. Sarah and Benjamin were coming over for Christmas Eve dinner, just like always. But something had been different about Judith lately. She seemed distant, distracted. When I would talk to her, she would give me these short answers and turn back to whatever she was watching on television. I figured it was just the winter blues hitting her harder than usual. The holidays could be tough when you're dealing with limitations. On December the 23rd, I was in the kitchen preparing her evening medications when she called me into the living room. Her voice had a strange tone to it, almost formal. I dried my hands on the dish towel and walked over to where she sat in her wheelchair by the window. "Frank, we need to talk," she said without looking at me. I sat down on the couch across from her, the same spot I had occupied for thousands of evenings over the past 16 years. "What's on your mind, honey?" She finally turned to face me, and there was something in her eyes I had never seen before. Cold, determined, almost cruel. "I'm bored with you, Frank. I've been bored for a long time." The words hit me like a physical blow. I felt my stomach drop, my mouth go dry. What do you mean? I mean exactly what I said. I'm tired of this life. Tired of you hovering over me every minute of every day. I've met someone else, someone who makes me feel alive again. I stared at her, trying to process what she was saying. After 16 years of devotion, of sacrifice, of giving up everything I had ever wanted for myself, she was telling me she had found someone else. Judith, I don't understand. Who? How? She shrugged as if we were discussing what to have for dinner. Does it matter? The point is, I want something different. I want him, not you. My hands were shaking. I clasped them together to try to stop the trembling. After everything we've been through? After everything I've done for you? That's exactly the problem, Frank. Everything you've done for me. I never asked you to give up your entire life. I never asked you to become my nursemaid. You chose that. And now I'm choosing something else. The casual cruelty in her voice was unlike anything I had ever heard from her. This wasn't the woman who used to thank me every day for taking care of her, who would tell me how grateful she was to have me in her life. So what happens now? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. I want you to move out after Christmas. I'll figure out my own care arrangements. I nodded slowly, not trusting myself to speak. Inside, something was breaking apart, but at the same time, something else was awakening. A part of me that had been dormant for 16 years. Okay, I said simply. She looked surprised, as if she had expected me to fight, to beg, to fall apart completely. But I didn't. I just sat there looking at her with new eyes. For the first time in 16 years, I really looked at my wife, and what I saw made my blood run cold. I barely slept that night. I lay in bed next to Judith, staring at the ceiling while she slept peacefully beside me, as if she hadn't just destroyed 16 years of my life with a few casual sentences. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard her voice saying those words, "I'm bored with you, Frank." The next morning, December 24th, I went through our usual routine mechanically, medications, breakfast, helping her get dressed. But something had shifted in me. For the first time in 16 years, I was really paying attention, not just going through the motions of caregiving, but actually observing. When I helped her transfer from the bed to her wheelchair, I noticed how she positioned herself. When I lifted her, there was something about the way her legs moved that seemed different, not completely lifeless like I remembered from the early days after the accident. There was tension there, muscle control that shouldn't exist if her spinal cord was truly severed. But I pushed the thought away. I was probably just imagining things because I was upset about what she had told me. Around 10 in the morning, I told Judith I needed to run to the grocery store to pick up some last-minute items for our Christmas Eve dinner. She nodded absently, already focused on her television program. I grabbed my keys and headed out. But instead of going to the store, I drove around the block and parked at the end of our street where I could see our house, but wouldn't be visible from the windows. I'm not sure why I did it. Call it instinct, call it paranoia, call it the desperate need to understand how my entire world had fallen apart overnight. I sat there for about 20 minutes just watching our house, feeling foolish and paranoid. Then I saw a car pull into our driveway, a silver sedan that I recognized immediately. Benjamin's car. My heart started pounding. What was my son-in-law doing at our house when Sarah was at work? Benjamin had his own job, some marketing position that kept him busy during regular business hours. There was no reason for him to be visiting Judith alone. I watched him get out of the car and walk up to our front door. He didn't knock. He used a key. When did Benjamin get a key to our house? I sat there for another hour, my mind racing with possibilities I didn't want to consider. Maybe Sarah had asked him to check on Judith. Maybe there was a perfectly innocent explanation. Maybe I was losing my mind from stress and heartbreak. Then Benjamin came back out, but he didn't leave immediately. He stood on the porch for a moment, looking around as if checking to see if anyone was watching. Then he walked back to his car and drove away. I waited another 10 minutes before driving home. When I walked through the front door, Judith looked startled, actually startled, like she hadn't expected me back so soon. "That was quick," she said, her voice a little too bright. "They didn't have what I needed, I lied. I'll try again later. For the rest of the day, I found myself studying Judith's every movement, every expression. When she thought I wasn't looking, there were moments when her face would relax into something that looked almost guilty. When I would catch her eye, she would quickly look away. That afternoon, while she was napping, I did something I had never done in 16 years of marriage. I went through her things, her purse, her bedside table, anywhere she might keep something private. I felt sick doing it, but I needed to understand what was happening to my life. In her purse, I found a prepaid cell phone I had never seen before, a cheap flip phone with a dozen numbers in the call history. Most of them were to the same number, calls that lasted 30 or 40 minutes. The most recent call was from that morning, right around the time Benjamin had been at the house. I wrote down the number and put the phone back exactly where I had found it. Then I went to my own phone and dialed it. "Hey, beautiful. Missing me already?" Benjamin's voice came through the line, warm and intimate, in a way that made my stomach turn. I hung up immediately. My son-in-law, the man who called me Dad and shook my hand every Sunday after dinner, the man who had been coming to our house for years, watching me care for his wife's mother, helping me move furniture and reach high shelves. He was the one who was making Judith feel alive again. The betrayal cut deeper than anything I had ever experienced. It wasn't just that my wife was leaving me for another man. She was leaving me for a man who had sat at our dinner table, eaten food I had cooked, pretended to care about our family while he was planning to destroy it. But that wasn't even the worst part. The worst part was what I discovered that evening. I told Judith I was going to take a shower before Sarah and Benjamin arrived for dinner. Instead, I quietly slipped out the back door and positioned myself where I could see into our living room through the window. The curtains were partially open, and with the lights on inside, I had a clear view of everything. What I saw made me question everything I thought I knew about the past 16 years. Judith was out of her wheelchair, not just out of it, but standing beside it, stretching her arms above her head like someone who had been sitting too long. Then she walked, normally and naturally, across the room to adjust the thermostat. I watched in stunned silence as my paralyzed wife moved around our living room like someone who had never been injured at all. She straightened the cushions on the couch, picked up magazines from the coffee table, and then walked to the kitchen to get herself a glass of water. When she returned to the living room, she sat back down in her wheelchair and positioned herself exactly as she had been when I left for my shower. I stood outside my own house in the December cold, watching the woman I had devoted my life to caring for reveal that she had never needed my care at all. Every bath I had helped her with, every transfer from bed to wheelchair, every doctor's appointment, every sacrifice I had made for 16 years had been based on a lie. The timer on my phone buzzed, reminding me that I had been showering for long enough. I slipped back into the house through the back door, my hands shaking so violently I could barely turn the doorknob. "How was your shower, honey?" Judith called from the living room, her voice sweet and concerned. "Fine," I managed to say. "Just fine." I walked into the living room and looked at her sitting in that wheelchair, the picture of helpless dependence. She smiled at me with what I had always believed was love and gratitude. Now I saw it for what it really was, pure calculated deception. Sarah and Benjamin arrived at 6 o'clock sharp, just like they had every Christmas Eve for years. Sarah hugged me and kissed my cheek, telling me how good the house smelled and how much she was looking forward to dinner. Benjamin shook my hand and asked if there was anything he could help with in the kitchen. As we sat around the dinner table, I watched my son-in-law cut my wife's food for her, just like he always did. I watched him speak to her in that gentle, respectful tone he always used when addressing his disabled mother-in-law. I watched my daughter thank him for being so thoughtful and caring, and I began to plan. Christmas morning was less than 6 hours away, and I was going to give my family a surprise they would never forget. Christmas morning arrived with a bitter cold that seemed to seep into my bones. I had been awake since 4 in the morning, sitting in the kitchen with a cup of coffee, planning every word I was going to say. The house was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of settling wood. Judith was still asleep in our bedroom, probably dreaming about her new life with Benjamin. I had spent the night thinking about 16 years of my life, 16 years of believing I was doing something noble, something necessary, 16 years of giving up fishing trips with my brother, poker nights with friends from work, vacations, hobbies, everything that had made me who I was before I became Judith's full-time caregiver. The math was staggering when I really thought about it. 16 years times 365 days. That was 5,840 days of my life dedicated to caring for someone who had been lying to me the entire time. 5,840 days of helping someone to the bathroom who could walk there herself. 5,840 nights of sleeping lightly so I could help her if she needed to be repositioned in bed. How much money had I spent over the years on her medical equipment? The wheelchair alone had cost $4,000, and insurance only covered half of that. The shower chair, the transfer bench, the hospital bed we had bought 3 years ago when she complained about back pain from our regular mattress. All of it unnecessary. All of it purchased by a man who was working part-time at a hardware store because he couldn't commit to full-time work when his wife needed constant care. At 7 o'clock, I heard Judith stirring in the bedroom. I quickly finished my coffee and went through the motions of our morning routine. Medications that she probably didn't need, help getting dressed that she definitely didn't require, and assistance transferring to her wheelchair. That was nothing more than an elaborate performance. But this morning, I paid attention to every detail. The way she positioned her legs when I helped her pivot from the bed. The way she gripped the armrests of her wheelchair. There was strength there, control, muscle memory of someone who had been practicing this deception for years. "You're quiet this morning," she said, as I pushed her wheelchair into the kitchen for breakfast. "Just thinking about Christmas," I replied, "about how much things are going to change." She looked up at me sharply, as if trying to detect whether there was a hidden meaning in my words. There was. Sarah and Benjamin were supposed to arrive at noon for Christmas dinner. We had planned to exchange gifts and then eat around 2 o'clock, just like we had done for the past several years. But this Christmas was going to be different. At 11:30, I excused myself to go shower and get ready for company. Instead, I positioned myself at the back window again, the one that gave me a clear view of our living room. Just like the night before, Judith waited until she thought I was safely occupied, then stood up from her wheelchair and began moving around the house normally. But this time, I was recording her with my phone. I watched through the camera lens as she walked to the front window to check for Sarah's car, then moved to the mirror in the hallway to fix her hair. She went to the kitchen and rearranged some items on the counter, moving with the ease of someone who had never been paralyzed at all. When the doorbell rang at exactly noon, she quickly returned to her wheelchair and positioned herself in the living room, hands folded in her lap, the picture of patient helplessness. I waited a moment, then came out of the bathroom and answered the door. "Merry Christmas, Dad." Sarah wrapped me in a tight hug, her face bright with holiday excitement. Behind her, Benjamin smiled and extended his hand for our usual handshake. "Merry Christmas, Frank," he said, looking me directly in the eye without a trace of guilt or shame. As we settled in the living room to exchange gifts, I watched the dynamic between Benjamin and Judith with new understanding. The way he positioned himself slightly closer to her wheelchair than necessary, the way she smiled when he spoke, a smile I hadn't seen her give me in months, the way they avoided looking directly at each other, as if they were afraid their secret would be visible to anyone paying attention. Sarah was oblivious to all of it, chattering happily about her job and showing us photos on her phone from a recent work party. She had always been close to her mother, and I could see how much it would destroy her to learn what Judith and Benjamin had been doing. "Dad, you seem distracted," Sarah said, touching my arm gently. "Are you feeling okay?" I forced a smile. "I'm fine, sweetheart, just thinking about how grateful I am to have you here." Benjamin shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Good. Let him squirm." "Actually," I continued, "I have something special planned for today, a surprise for everyone." Judith's head snapped up, her eyes meeting mine with obvious alarm. She knew me well enough to recognize when I wasn't being entirely truthful about something. "What kind of surprise?" she asked, her voice carefully neutral. "You'll see, but first, let's eat dinner. I made all your favorite foods, Judith. After all, this might be our last Christmas dinner together as a family. The words hung in the air like a threat. Sarah looked confused, glancing between her mother and me, as if trying to understand what I meant. Benjamin's face had gone pale. "What do you mean, Dad?" Sarah asked. "Your mother has some news to share," I said calmly. "Don't you, Judith?" Judith's hands gripped the armrests of her wheelchair so tightly her knuckles went white. "Frank, I don't think this is the time or place." "Oh, I think it's the perfect time," I interrupted. "Christmas is about family, isn't it? About being honest with the people we love. About not keeping secrets." Benjamin cleared his throat. "Maybe we should just focus on enjoying the holiday." "Bites." I turned to look at him. Really look at him. For the first time since discovering the truth. He was younger than me by about 15 years, still had all his hair, probably made twice as much money as I ever had. I could see why Judith might find him appealing, especially compared to a worn-out 59-year-old man who smelled like medication and spent his days doing laundry and cleaning bathrooms. "You're absolutely right, Benjamin," I said. "We should focus on enjoying the holiday. In fact, I think we should make this a Christmas to remember. I've been working on a special project for weeks now, a photo album of our family memories. Would you like to see it?" I had been working on it, just not in the way they thought. For the past week, since I first started suspecting something was wrong, I had been gathering evidence, photos, documents, records of phone calls, and visits. Everything I needed to prove what had been happening in my house while I trusted my wife and son-in-law to respect our family. "That sounds lovely, Frank," Judith said, but her voice was strained. "Great. Let me go get it. I'll be right back." As I walked toward our bedroom, I heard Benjamin's voice behind me, low and urgent. "We need to leave. Now." But it was too late for that. They had made their choice when they decided to betray not just me, but Sarah as well. Now they were going to face the consequences. I returned to the living room carrying a large photo album and my laptop computer. Sarah's face lit up with genuine excitement. "Oh, I love looking at old family photos. This is such a thoughtful gift, Dad." "This isn't just any photo album," I said, setting up the laptop on the coffee table where everyone could see the screen. "This is the story of our family, the real story. And I think it's time everyone knew the truth." I opened the photo album carefully, deliberately, watching as everyone gathered around to see. The first few pages contained exactly what they expected. Family photos from better times. Sarah as a baby. Our wedding pictures, vacations we had taken before the accident. Normal family memories that would lull them into thinking this was just a nostalgic Christmas surprise. "Oh, look, there's me on my first day of kindergarten." Sarah pointed at a photo of herself holding a lunchbox, grinning with missing front teeth. "Mom, you look so young there." Judith smiled, but I could see the tension in her shoulders. She knew I was building towards something, but she couldn't figure out what. "Your mother was beautiful," I said, turning the page. "Still is, of course. These next photos are from right after the accident." The mood in the room shifted as we reached pictures from Judith's early days in the hospital. Sarah's face grew somber as she looked at images of her mother connected to machines, learning to use a wheelchair, going through physical therapy. "This was such a hard time for all of us," I said, my voice steady and calm. "Everything changed overnight. Our whole family had to learn a new way of living." I turned another page, revealing photos of me helping Judith with daily tasks, getting her into the car, assisting with transfers, pushing her wheelchair through the grocery store. 16 years, I continued, 16 years of this routine, every single day, 365 days a year. "Sarah, do you remember how I had to quit my foreman job at the construction company?" Sarah nodded, her eyes growing misty. "You gave up everything to take care of Mom." "I did. I gave up my career, my hobbies, my friends. I turned down that promotion that would have moved us to Florida because the doctor said your mother needed consistency and familiar surroundings." Benjamin shifted uncomfortably in his chair. He was starting to understand where this was heading. "The financial sacrifice was significant too," I continued, turning to a page filled with medical bills and insurance documents I had photocopied. "Do you know how much it costs to care for someone with a spinal cord injury?" The wheelchair alone was $4,000, the shower modifications, the ramps, the hospital bed, not to mention the ongoing medical expenses. I pulled out a calculator and started adding numbers out loud. $4,000 for the wheelchair, $3,000 for bathroom modifications, $2,000 for the hospital bed, $800 for the shower chair. The ramp cost me $1,200 in materials and labor. Sarah was watching me with growing concern. "Dad, what are you trying to say?" "I'm saying that over 16 years, I spent approximately $73,000 in direct medical and accommodation expenses for your mother. That doesn't include the income I lost by quitting my job early or the overtime I couldn't work because I needed to be home to care for her." The room was completely quiet except for the sound of pages turning as I continued through the album. "But money isn't really the issue here," I said, my voice growing harder. "The real issue is trust, commitment, the vows we made to each other about sickness and health for better or worse." I stopped at a page that contained printed emails and phone records. "Sarah, did you know that your husband has been visiting our house regularly during work hours for the past 6 months? Sarah's head snapped toward Benjamin, confusion written across her face. "What, Benjamin? You never mentioned stopping by Mom and Dad's during the day." Benjamin's face was flushed red. Sometimes I would check on them if I was in the neighborhood." "That's interesting," I said, pulling out the phone records I had compiled, "because, according to these records, you've been here every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon for the past 23 weeks, always between 1 and 3 o'clock when Sarah is at work." Judith had gone completely pale. Her hands were trembling as she gripped her wheelchair armrests. "And even more interesting," I continued, turning to a page with photos of Benjamin's car in our driveway, "you have a key to our house. When did I give you a key, Benjamin?" "Dad, what's going on?" Sarah's voice was rising with panic. "Why are you acting like this?" I ignored her question and turned to another page in the album. This one contained printed screenshots from the hidden camera I had installed in our living room 3 days ago after I discovered Judith's secret phone. "These photos were taken yesterday morning while I was supposedly at the grocery store," I said, pointing to time-stamped images that showed Benjamin entering our house. But the next page was what made Sarah gasp out loud. The photos showed Judith standing up from her wheelchair, walking across the room, embracing Benjamin in a way that left no doubt about the nature of their relationship. "No," Sarah whispered, staring at the images. "No, this can't be real." Benjamin stood up abruptly, his face panicked. "Sarah, let me explain." Explain what?" she demanded, her voice breaking. "Explain how you've been having an affair with my mother? Explain how you've been lying to me for months?" But I wasn't finished yet. I turned to the final section of the album, the part that would destroy everything Judith had built her deception on. "The most interesting discovery," I said, my voice now ice cold, "wasn't the affair. It was this." I opened my laptop and pressed play on a video file. The screen filled with footage I had taken through our back window, showing Judith getting up from her wheelchair and walking normally around our house. The video was crystal clear. There was no denying what everyone was seeing. Judith moving with perfect mobility, no sign of paralysis or disability, walking from room to room like someone who had never been injured at all. Sarah's face went white as she watched her mother, the woman she believed had been paralyzed for 16 years, walking around their house with complete normalcy. "This video was taken this morning," I said, "while you thought I was in the shower getting ready for Christmas dinner." Judith finally found her voice, but it came out as barely a whisper. "Frank, please. Please what?" I demanded, my calm facade finally cracking. "Please continue to pretend that I've been caring for an invalid for 16 years. Please keep quiet about the fact that you've been having an affair with our son-in-law. Please don't tell our daughter that her entire understanding of our family has been a lie." Sarah was staring at her mother with an expression of complete horror and betrayal. "Mom, is this true? Have you been able to walk this whole time?" Judith's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. She looked like a fish gasping for air, her whole world collapsing around her. Benjamin made one last desperate attempt to salvage the situation. "Sarah, you have to understand, your mother was depressed. She felt trapped." "Shut up," Sarah said, her voice deadly quiet. "Just shut up and get out of my sight." "Sarah, please let me explain." "Yeah, "Get out!" she screamed, pointing toward the door. "Get out of this house right now!" Benjamin looked around the room desperately, as if searching for someone who might defend him. Finding no allies, he grabbed his coat and headed for the door. "This isn't over," he said, looking back at me with genuine hatred in his eyes. "Oh, yes, it is," I replied calmly. "It's very much over." As the door slammed behind Benjamin, I turned back to face my wife and daughter. Sarah was crying now, huge tears streaming down her face as she stared at Judith with a mixture of heartbreak and rage. And Judith was still sitting in that wheelchair, still maintaining the pretense even now, even after being completely exposed. But I could see something changing in her expression. The mask was finally slipping, and what was underneath was something I had never seen before in 16 years of marriage. Pure, calculated malice. The silence in the room after Benjamin left was deafening. Sarah sat frozen on the couch, staring at her mother, with tears streaming down her face. Judith remained in her wheelchair, but something fundamental had shifted. The helpless, grateful expression she had worn for 16 years was gone, replaced by something cold and calculating. "Well," Judith said finally, her voice completely different from the soft, dependent tone I had grown accustomed to. "I suppose there's no point in pretending anymore." And then she did something that made Sarah gasp and made my blood run cold. She stood up, not carefully, not with the hesitation of someone learning to walk again. She stood up smoothly, confidently, like someone who had been doing it every day for 16 years. "Mom?" Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. Judith stretched, rolling her shoulders and arching her back like someone who had been sitting too long. "God, that wheelchair is uncomfortable. Do you have any idea how hard it is to sit in that thing for hours at a time, pretending to be helpless?" Sarah looked like she was going to be sick. "How long? How long have you been able to walk?" Judith laughed, and it was a sound I had never heard from her before. Bitter, cruel, completely without warmth. "The whole time, sweetheart. From day one." The room started spinning around me. "What do you mean from day one?" "I mean, the accident was real, but the paralysis wasn't. Oh, I had some injuries, sure, broken ribs, a concussion, some nasty bruises, but my legs, my spinal cord, perfectly fine. The doctor said I was incredibly lucky." She walked over to the window, moving with complete normalcy, and looked out at our snow-covered yard. "But you know what I realized while I was lying in that hospital bed? I realized I had a choice. I could go back to my boring life, cooking and cleaning and working part-time at that awful insurance office. Or I could let everyone believe I was paralyzed and have someone take care of me for the rest of my life." Sarah was sobbing now, her whole body shaking. "But why? Why would you do that to Dad? To me?" Judith turned back to face us, and her expression was completely without remorse. "Because I deserved it. Do you know what my life was like before the accident? Working 40 hours a week, then coming home to cook dinner and do laundry and clean the house while your father watched television? When was the last time I got to sleep in? When was the last time someone brought me breakfast in bed? When was the last time anyone worried about whether I was comfortable or happy? I felt like I was looking at a stranger. Judith, I loved you. I took care of you because I wanted to. And I let you," she said with a shrug. "You seemed to enjoy it, Frank, playing the devoted husband, the hero who gave up everything for his disabled wife. It made you feel important, didn't it? Like you were doing something noble?" The cruelty in her voice was breathtaking. This was the woman I had sacrificed everything for. And she was talking about my devotion like it was some kind of character flaw. "The insurance money helped too," she continued. $75,000 for pain and suffering, plus the monthly disability payments. Did you really think I was going to give that up to go back to filing insurance claims?" Sarah looked up from her hands, her face streaked with tears. "So, Benjamin, how long has that been going on?" "About 8 months, Judith said casually. "He started coming around more often after you got that promotion at work. All those late nights you were staying at the office. Poor Benjamin was so lonely. And I was so bored, sitting in this house all day with your father hovering over me like a mother hen." She laughed again. "Benjamin was easy. A few conversations about how trapped I felt, how I dreamed of being able to walk again, how romantic it would be to dance with someone. He ate it up. Men are so predictable when they think they're rescuing someone. I was having trouble breathing. You manipulated him too. Of course I did, just like I manipulated you. The difference is, Benjamin is young and interesting and makes me feel alive. You're old and boring and smell like arthritis cream. Sarah stood up suddenly, her face flushed with rage. How could you do this to him? Dad gave up everything for you. He chose to, Judith said dismissively. No one forced him to quit his job or give up his hobbies. He made those decisions because it made him feel good about himself. Don't blame me for letting him play the martyr. I looked at this woman I had been married to for 23 years, and I realized I had never known her at all. The grateful, dependent wife had been an act. The loving mother who worried about being a burden had been a performance. Even her depression, her tears on bad days, her gratitude for my care, all of it had been lies. The physical therapy appointments, I said, pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. You've been going twice a week for 16 years. What have you been doing there? Actually going to physical therapy, she said with a smirk, just not the kind everyone thought. I've been working out, staying in shape, making sure I could maintain the illusion when I needed to. Dr. Peterson thinks I'm a miracle case, showing slight improvement after all these years. He has no idea I could run a marathon if I wanted to. Sarah was staring at her mother like she was looking at a monster. What about all the times you cried? All the times you said you felt like a burden? Acting, Judith said simply. You're not the only one who took drama classes in high school, Sarah. I just put my skills to better use. The room felt like it was closing in on me. 16 years of my life, gone. Not just wasted, but stolen by someone who had planned and executed the cruelest deception I could imagine. So what now, I asked, my voice hollow. Was the plan always to leave me for Benjamin? Eventually, she said. But Benjamin got impatient. He started talking about us running away together, starting fresh somewhere new. The poor boy actually thought he was going to rescue me from my wheelchair-bound life. She shook her head mockingly. Men and their savior complexes. Sarah had stopped crying. Now she was just staring at Judith with an expression of pure disgust. You're sick? You're actually sick. I'm practical, Judith corrected. I saw an opportunity and I took it. The only mistake I made was underestimating your father's detective skills. She walked back toward her wheelchair, but instead of sitting down, she kicked it across the room. It hit the wall with a loud crash, one of the wheels spinning uselessly. I'm done with that thing, she said. I'm done with all of this. But as she spoke, something strange was happening to her face. The color was draining from her cheeks, and she was starting to sway slightly on her feet. Judith, I said, noticing the change. She put a hand to her forehead, blinking rapidly. I feel strange. Sarah looked at me, then back at her mother. Mom, are you okay? Judith tried to take a step toward the couch, but her legs buckled. She reached out desperately for something to steady herself, but there was nothing within reach. I can't feel my legs, she said, panic creeping into her voice. Then she collapsed, not gracefully, not like someone pretending to faint. She went down hard, hitting the coffee table on her way to the floor. The sound of her head striking the wood was sickening. Sarah screamed and rushed to her mother's side. Mom, can you hear me? Judith's eyes were open, but she wasn't responding. Blood was pooling beneath her head where it had struck the table. I stood there for a moment, watching this woman who had destroyed my life, lying motionless on our living room floor, and I felt absolutely nothing. Then my training kicked in. 16 years of medical appointments and physical therapy sessions had taught me basic first aid. I knelt down beside Judith and checked her pulse. Call 911, I told Sarah. As Sarah frantically dialed for help, I looked down at Judith's still form and wondered if this was karma, justice, or just a terrible irony. The woman who had pretended to be paralyzed for 16 years might have just become paralyzed for real. 3 months later, I sat in my new apartment, a small but comfortable one-bedroom place across town, watching the morning news while drinking coffee from my favorite mug. The same mug I had used for 16 years, but now it tasted different. Everything tasted different when you weren't carrying the weight of someone else's lies. Judith was in a rehabilitation facility about 20 miles away. The doctors said the head injury had caused a blood clot that resulted in actual paralysis this time. The irony wasn't lost on any of us. She had spent 16 years pretending to be disabled, and now she genuinely was. But here's the thing that surprised everyone, including me. I didn't feel guilty about not visiting her. I didn't feel obligated to care for her. When the social worker suggested that, as her husband, I might want to consider bringing her home and resuming my caregiver role, I looked her straight in the eye and said, no. The divorce papers had been filed 6 weeks ago. After everything that had come out during the investigation into Judith's accident, no court in the country would have blamed me for wanting out of the marriage. The insurance fraud alone was enough to void any claim she might have had to alimony or property settlement. Sarah was struggling, but she was healing. She had moved back in with me temporarily while her own divorce from Benjamin proceeded through the courts. It had been difficult for her to process that both her mother and her husband had betrayed not just me, but her as well. I keep thinking about all the times I felt sorry for Mom, she had told me just last week. All the times I brought her flowers or special food to cheer her up. All the guilt I felt when I couldn't visit as often as I thought I should. Benjamin had left town entirely. Word was he had moved back in with his parents in Oregon, his marketing career effectively over once word of the scandal spread through his company. Sarah had been generous in the divorce settlement, taking only what was rightfully hers and leaving him to rebuild his life from scratch. The financial freedom was something I was still getting used to. For 16 years, every penny I earned had gone toward Judith's care or our household expenses. Now, for the first time since I was 43 years old, my money was my own. The part-time job at the hardware store had become full-time, and my boss had hinted about a promotion to assistant manager. But more than the money, it was the time that felt miraculous. I woke up when I wanted to wake up. I ate what I wanted to eat. If I felt like watching a baseball game, I watched it without worrying about whether someone needed help getting to the bathroom or if medications needed to be administered. Last weekend, I had driven up to the lake with my brother Tom for our first fishing trip in 16 years. We had caught exactly nothing, but we had laughed until our sides hurt, talking about old times and making plans for the future. Tom couldn't believe the change in me. "It's like you came back from the dead," he had said, and that was exactly how it felt. The guilt I expected to feel about Judith's condition never materialized. I had spent too many years being manipulated by her to feel responsible for her actual medical needs now. She had made her choices, and those choices had consequences. The fact that karma had delivered those consequences in such a dramatically appropriate way was something I couldn't control. The insurance investigation had been thorough and damning. 16 years of fraudulent disability claims, totaling over $200,000. The district attorney was pursuing criminal charges, though Judith's current medical condition would likely influence any sentence she received. What surprised me most was how little anger I felt toward her now. In the immediate aftermath of the revelation, I had been furious. But as the weeks passed, the anger had faded into something closer to pity. Judith had spent 16 years of her life sitting in a wheelchair, pretending to be helpless, afraid to stand up even when she was alone in case someone saw her. That was its own kind of prison. Benjamin, on the other hand, had earned my lasting contempt. He had willingly participated in deceiving not just me, but his own wife. He had sat at our dinner table for years, knowing he was planning to destroy our family, and had smiled while doing it. Sarah was seeing a therapist to help her process the trauma of discovering that the two people she trusted most in the world had been lying to her for months. The betrayal had shaken her faith in her own judgment, her ability to trust others. "How did I not see it?" she would ask me sometimes. "How could I live with Benjamin for 3 years and not know he was capable of something like this?" I understood her confusion. I had lived with Judith for 23 years and had no idea she was capable of sustaining such an elaborate deception. Today was Tuesday, which meant it was my day off from the hardware store. In the old life, Tuesday would have been filled with doctor's appointments, physical therapy sessions, grocery shopping for special dietary requirements, and all the other tasks that came with caring for someone with disabilities. Now, Tuesday was mine. I had plans to drive out to the state park and take a hike on one of the trails I used to love before my life became consumed with caregiving duties. After that, maybe I would stop by the bookstore and browse the fishing and outdoor magazines. Simple pleasures I had forgotten I enjoyed. My phone rang, interrupting my morning coffee. It was the social worker from Judith's facility. "Mr. Henderson, I wanted to follow up on our conversation about your wife's care plan." "My soon-to-be ex-wife," I corrected, "and as I told you before, I won't be participating in her care. I understand this is a difficult situation, but she has requested to see you. She says she wants to apologize." I took a sip of my coffee and looked out the window at my small balcony, where I had hung a bird feeder and was learning to identify the different species that visited it each morning. "Tell her I said no thank you. I'm not interested in her apologies." "Mr. Henderson, I know you're angry, but she's genuinely struggling with her condition. A visit from family might help her adjustment." "She struggled with her fake condition for 16 years too," I said. "She managed that just fine without my help." After I hung up, I finished my coffee in peace and got ready for my hike. The weather was perfect, crisp but sunny, the kind of day that made you grateful to be alive and healthy and free. As I laced up my hiking boots, the first pair I had owned in 16 years, I thought about forgiveness. People kept asking me if I planned to forgive Judith eventually. The therapist Sarah had recommended I see had suggested that forgiveness might be part of my healing process, but I wasn't angry anymore, so there didn't seem to be anything to forgive. Judith had shown me who she really was, and I had chosen to remove her from my life accordingly. It wasn't about forgiveness or revenge. It was about self-preservation and moving forward. At 59 years old, I was starting over completely. New apartment, new routines, new relationships with old friends, new possibilities I hadn't considered in decades. Sarah and I were closer than we had been since she was a child, bonded by our shared experience of being betrayed by people we trusted. The trail at the state park was exactly as I remembered it, winding through tall pines and opening onto scenic overlooks of the valley below. I hiked for 3 hours, stopping frequently to rest and enjoy views I had almost forgotten existed. On the drive home, I made a decision. Tomorrow, I was going to call the community college and ask about their evening classes. Maybe photography or woodworking, something I had always wanted to try but never had time for. 16 years of my life had been stolen from me, but I still had years ahead. Good years, free years, honest years where I could trust that the people in my life were there because they wanted to be, not because they needed something from me. As I pulled into the parking lot of my apartment complex, I saw Sarah's car waiting for me. She had driven over to check on me, something she had been doing more frequently since the divorce proceedings began. "How was your hike, Dad?" she asked, giving me a hug that felt like forgiveness for all the years I had been too distracted by Judith's needs to give her my full attention. "Perfect," I said, and meant it. We went upstairs together, and I made us both coffee while she told me about her job interviews and her plans to move into her own place next month. She was rebuilding her life too, learning to trust her own judgment again. That evening, as we sat on my small balcony watching the sunset, Sarah asked me the question I had been expecting. "Do you ever regret it? Giving up all those years for her?" I thought about it for a long moment, watching a cardinal at my bird feeder. "No," I said finally. "I did what I thought was right with the information I had. That's all any of us can do. The regret isn't mine to carry." And for the first time in 16 years, I felt completely, absolutely free.